The phone rang at 2:14 a.m. She remembered the exact time because the sound ripped her out of a dream, the kind where life still felt normal. For a few seconds, she didn't answer. Maybe if she ignored it, nothing bad would exist yet. But when she finally picked up, a voice she didn't recognize said the words that split her world in half. "Your husband's been in an accident." Her heart stopped. The voice kept talking, about location, about emergency response, about how they were doing everything they could, but the only thing she heard was the word accident. She threw on the first clothes she could find and drove through the empty streets, every red light a blur of panic and prayers. The city felt hollow at that hour, like it already knew something she didn't. When she reached the hospital, the smell hit her first: antiseptic, cold metal, and fear. A nurse asked for his name, her voice gentle but practiced. "Please," she whispered. "Just tell me if he's alive." Minutes felt like years until the doors of the operating room opened. And then she saw him. Not her husband, the man walking toward her, pulling off his gloves, his scrubs marked with effort and something human beneath all that calm. "He's stable," the doctor said, meeting her eyes. "We stopped the bleeding. He's going to make it." She didn't even realize she'd been holding her breath until it escaped her like a sob. Her knees went weak. He reached out instinctively, a steadying hand on her shoulder, professional, comforting. But in that second, when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Not attraction. Not yet. Just the raw electricity of survival, the strange bond between the one who saves and the one who was saved. She whispered, "Thank you." He nodded. "You don't need to thank me. Just be here when he wakes up." And she promised she would. She had no idea that from that night on, she'd never really leave. Hospitals don't sleep. They just dim their lights and whisper instead of talk. She sat in a plastic chair outside his room, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Machines beeped through the door, slow, steady, too human to be mechanical. Every sound in the corridor seemed to echo her pulse. It was almost 4 a.m. when he appeared again, the doctor. His expression calm, controlled, like he'd learned to breathe differently than the rest of the world. He carried a paper cup of coffee and handed it to her without asking. "You need this more than I do," he said. She took it, her fingers brushing his, barely, but enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin. "I don't think I can sleep," she admitted. "You shouldn't try yet," he said softly. "Your mind's too loud." That made her smile, the first time her face had remembered how since the phone call. "Is it that obvious?" "It's normal," he replied. "You've been holding your breath for hours." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the fluorescent light tracing the tired lines of his face. "You did everything you could," she whispered, looking at the door. "So did you," he said. "You came." They stood in silence. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped, a nurse laughed quietly, a door closed. Ordinary sounds that suddenly felt sacred. He asked her about her husband, how long they'd been married, what he liked to do, small talk meant to keep her anchored. But she noticed something in his voice, not just professionalism, but something gentler. Real. When she said, "He works too much," the doctor smiled faintly. "That makes two of us." "You don't seem tired," she said. He looked at her then, eyes steady. "That's because I can't afford to be." She wanted to ask his name, but before she could, another nurse called for him. He nodded, already half turned away. "Try to rest," he said. "You're safe here." She watched him walk down the corridor until he disappeared through a set of swinging doors. And for the first time that night, she realized it wasn't just her husband's life that had been changed in that room. Something inside her had shifted too, quietly, like the space between heartbeats. The next morning bled into afternoon before her husband finally opened his eyes. The nurse had called her name, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. She rushed to his bedside, tears already gathering, waiting for that cinematic relief, the one where love rushes back like air. But it didn't happen. He blinked slowly, confused, groggy. Where am I? You're okay, she whispered, her voice shaking with all the hours she'd spent praying for this moment. You're in the hospital. There was an accident, but you're safe now. He turned his head toward her, sluggishly, painfully, and gave a faint nod. Okay. That was it. No, thank God, no, I missed you. Just okay. She tried to smile. They said you're going to recover. It'll take time, but... He winced, interrupting her. Can you tell them the lights are too bright? She froze. Of course. She called the nurse, dimmed the lights, adjusted his pillow, held his hand, but his fingers didn't hold back. He was alive. That was all that mattered. So why did it already feel like she was losing him anyway? Later, when the doctor came in to check his vitals, her husband barely looked at him. Just answered questions with one-word replies. The doctor was patient, precise, explaining everything clearly, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. But when their eyes met, just for a second, she felt it again, that quiet steadiness that kept her from breaking apart. After he left the room, she stepped into the hallway to thank him. You said he'd wake up, she said. You were right. He nodded. He's lucky. The fractures will heal, but the recovery will be slow. Her voice softened. I don't care how long it takes. He glanced at her, eyes searching hers for a moment. You say that like you need convincing. She didn't answer. Because he was right. She stood there, watching as he walked away again, tall, calm, a ghost in pale blue scrubs, and for some reason, she didn't go back into the room right away. Because for the first time, she realized that what scared her most wasn't losing her husband. It was the way she'd started to feel safe only when the doctor was near. The nurses began to recognize her. She wasn't just a visitor anymore, she was the woman who never left. Every morning she brought a change of clothes for her husband, read the same news headlines aloud, pretended everything was okay. And every evening, when the hallways went quiet, she found herself in the same place, standing near the nurse's station, waiting for him. The doctor. He moved through the hospital like calm in human form, precise, composed, yet somehow gentle in every motion. She told herself she waited for updates, but that wasn't true anymore. She waited for him. That night he noticed her sitting by the vending machine, staring at her untouched cup of tea. You'll start growing roots here, he said softly, walking over. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's the only way to stay upright. He sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. You need rest. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I hear those machines. Then you should leave for a few hours. Get some air. I don't want to. He nodded, understanding something she didn't say. You're afraid something will happen if you're not here. Her voice dropped. Because something already did. For a moment, neither spoke. There was too much honesty in the air. Then he said quietly, you don't have to hold all of it alone. She looked up at him. And who else would? His answer came without hesitation. Someone who understands what it's like to stay awake when everyone else is sleeping. That line hit deeper than it should have. She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. Gratitude wasn't what she felt, not really. It was something else. Something warmer, heavier. When he stood to leave, she surprised herself by saying, Can I bring you coffee tomorrow? He smiled, small, real, tired. If you do, make it black. No sugar. After he left, she sat for a long time, staring at the space where he'd been. And for the first time since the accident, the thought of tomorrow didn't feel impossible. By the end of the week, her husband was stable enough to be moved out of intensive care. It should have felt like relief, like they'd finally reached the light after a tunnel. But to her, the new room felt colder. Too quiet. Too ordinary. She still came every day, sometimes bringing soup, sometimes a book he never opened. They barely spoke. He scrolled through his phone or stared out the window, and she sat there pretending not to notice how far away he already was. But every time she passed through the corridor, she caught sight of him, the doctor, even when she wasn't looking for him. He'd nod politely, that professional kind of smile that hides too much emotion. But when their eyes met for a second too long, something unspoken passed again. Not flirtation. Not yet. Just awareness. That evening, she lingered longer than usual. Her husband had fallen asleep, the hospital wing wrapped in a soft, mechanical rhythm, monitors, footsteps, distant doors. She found herself standing by the coffee machine, lost in thought, when his voice startled her gently. "Back again?" he asked. She smiled tiredly. "I guess I don't know where else to be." "That's dangerous," he said. "Why?" He hesitated, then, "Because when you forget where home is, you start calling other places safe." She didn't answer. She didn't know how. They walked down the hall together, slowly, quietly, their words careful, their silences even more revealing. She noticed how he listened, how he didn't interrupt. When she mentioned how her husband barely talked anymore, he said, "Sometimes silence isn't distance. It's exhaustion." "And what if it is?" "Then you have to decide whether you're waiting for him to come back, or waiting for permission to leave." The words hit too close, and she turned her head away so he wouldn't see her eyes fill. When they stopped at the door to her husband's room, he said softly, "Go home tonight. Just for a few hours. You need to breathe somewhere else." She nodded, even though they both knew she wouldn't. And as he walked away, she realized she didn't just come to check on her husband anymore. She came because she'd started to need the sound of his voice to remember she was still alive. The doctors said her husband was improving. But every day he seemed further away. He barely smiled now, barely spoke. His hands shook when he tried to hold a fork. She tried to help, but he flinched, not in pain, just distance. "Please," she whispered one evening, "let me do something." "I don't need your help," he muttered, eyes fixed on the TV mounted above the bed. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. She stepped out into the hallway, breathing in that sterile air that somehow felt safer than the house they used to share. And there he was again, the doctor. Always calm. Always steady. He looked at her the way no one else did, like he actually saw the exhaustion hiding behind her smile. "You should go home," he said gently. "Get some rest." She shook her head. "I don't like being home right now." "Because of him?" She hesitated. "Because of who I am when he's there." He didn't reply, but she saw the understanding in his eyes, the kind that didn't need words. They started walking the corridor together, slow steps beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. She told him things she hadn't said aloud before, how her marriage had been fragile long before the crash, how she'd spent years pretending to be strong for someone who no longer noticed her. He listened, quietly, completely. When they stopped near the window at the end of the hall, he said, "You know, people think healing is just about the body. But sometimes the real recovery starts here." He pointed to his chest. "In the parts we ignore the longest." She looked at him for a long time, her throat tight. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he said. "But it's worth trying." A nurse called his name from across the corridor. He turned to leave but paused, lowering his voice, "You don't have to hide how tired you are. Not with me." And as he walked away, she realized something she didn't want to admit, his voice had become the only sound that could still calm her. He'd been home for almost 2 weeks. The doctors called it a success. She called it survival, nothing more. Every day felt like walking through fog. Her husband slept late, spoke little, and the man she'd once loved seemed to have been left behind somewhere on that highway. She cooked, cleaned, waited, and tried not to think about the one person who still made her feel awake. But some silences begged to be broken. One afternoon, she found herself standing in front of the hospital again. She'd told herself it was just to pick up discharge papers. A signature. Nothing more. Yet as she walked through the glass doors, that familiar sterile smell hit her, sharp and clean, like memory. She saw him at the nurse's desk. The doctor. He looked up before she could speak, recognition flickering across his face, followed by something gentler. "You're not supposed to be here anymore," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "I just needed to finish some paperwork." He smiled faintly. "There's no paperwork left." Her throat tightened. "Then I guess I just needed a reason." They both stood in the hallway, caught between what was appropriate and what was real. He motioned toward the courtyard. "Walk with me?" She nodded. Outside, the winter air bit at their skin, the sun barely pushing through the clouds. They sat on a cold bench in silence until he said, "How's your husband?" "He's recovering." "That's good." She hesitated. "But he's not really there anymore." "Not the way he was." He looked at her then, not as a doctor, but as a man who understood emptiness. "I see that more often than you think," he said quietly. "People survive, but not everything inside them does." Her eyes stung, and she laughed softly. "You always know what to say." "That's not true," he murmured. "I just know what not to." The air between them changed. Again. That same quiet pull neither of them asked for. When she stood to leave, he said, "You shouldn't come back." "I know." But neither of them moved. She finally said goodbye and walked toward the doors, her heart hammering like she'd done something wrong. And when she reached her car, her phone buzzed. One message. "You didn't have to find a reason to come. I would have been enough." She stared at the screen, the words glowing against her trembling hands, and realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't pretend didn't exist anymore. That night she couldn't stop staring at her phone. The message was still there, glowing faintly in the dark bedroom. "You didn't have to find a reason to come. I would have been enough." Her husband was asleep beside her, his breathing uneven, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence. She should have deleted it. Should have turned off the phone, rolled over, and pretended the world still made sense. But her thumb hovered over the screen. She typed. "You shouldn't say things like that." Then, after a pause, she erased it. Typed again. "You make it sound like I wanted to see you." Erased that too. Finally, she wrote what she actually meant. "Maybe I did." She stared at it for a long time before hitting send. The reply came minutes later. "Then I'm not the only one pretending anymore." Her pulse quickened. It wasn't flirtation, it was something quieter, heavier. The kind of honesty that feels like falling. They started texting more after that, at first just small things. How her husband's recovery was going. How the hospital was doing. He'd write late at night, when his shifts ended and the world was asleep. Sometimes he'd say things like, "It's strange how hospitals teach you to fix people, but not yourself." Or, "You look like someone who stopped waiting to be understood." She didn't know how to respond to that. So she'd send something simple, like, "You think too much." But he always replied, "Only when I'm talking to you." Days blurred into nights. The messages turned into conversations, and the conversations turned into something else, something that lived in the spaces between words. One evening, he wrote, "Do you ever feel guilty for wanting peace instead of love?" She read it again and again. Finally, she answered, "Every day." After that, there was a long pause, and then, one more message. "Then maybe we're the same kind of broken." Her husband stirred beside her. She turned off the screen, heart pounding, guilt clawing its way through her chest, but underneath it all, something warmer. Because for the first time in years, someone was talking to her like she still mattered. It came late, too late for a normal text. The kind that buzzes in the dark and makes your heart react before your brain does. "Can we talk?" Just in person. Nothing more. She stared at the message for a full minute before locking her phone. Her husband was in the living room, watching TV with the sound too loud, The same news anchor saying the same things that made the world feel small and predictable. Nothing more. She unlocked the phone again. Where? He replied instantly. There's a cafe near the hospital. Quiet. No one from work goes there. She typed back. This isn't a good idea. But she didn't send it. Instead, she whispered to herself, it's just a conversation, grabbed her coat, and left before she could talk herself out of it. The cafe was almost empty, dim lights, soft jazz, the faint scent of rain from outside. He was already there, still in his scrubs, a coffee in front of him that had long gone cold. When he saw her, he smiled, not wide, just enough to soften the air around them. I didn't think you'd come, he said. I didn't think I would either. They talked about ordinary things at first, the weather, his shifts, her husband's progress. But the space between their words kept tightening. Every pause said more than the sentences that filled it. At one point, he said quietly, you don't look tired tonight. She gave a faint laugh. Maybe I am. Just tired in new places. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You know what I see when I look at you? She shook her head. Someone who's been taking care of everyone else for so long, she forgot what it feels like to be cared for. She froze. Don't. I'm not trying to cross a line, he said softly. I'm just saying what's true. Silence fell again, thick and fragile. Finally, she whispered, you shouldn't say things like that. I know. Then why do you? Because I can't stop thinking about you. Her breath caught. She wanted to stand up, to walk away, to do anything that would make this moment less real. But she didn't move. Instead, she said the only thing that made sense in the middle of the chaos they'd built together. Neither can I. He looked at her then, really looked, and she knew it wasn't a conversation anymore. It was the beginning of something they'd both spend the rest of their lives pretending never happened. She told herself it was nothing. Just a visit, a quick check, a follow-up on some medical report that didn't even matter. That's what she said out loud, at least. But by the time she parked outside the hospital, it was already past 9 p.m., and the truth was impossible to hide. The corridors looked different at night, emptier, quieter, softer. The daytime chaos was gone, only the hum of machines and the faint rhythm of footsteps remained. She walked slowly, tracing every sound as if it would lead her back to reason. He was at the nurse's desk, signing charts, head slightly tilted, eyes focused, the same steady calm that had become her undoing. When he looked up and saw her, something flickered across his face, surprise, then warmth, then that dangerous kind of understanding. You shouldn't be here, he said, setting down the pen. I know, she whispered. So why are you? I don't know anymore. He studied her, not the way a man studies a woman, but the way someone studies the moment they know they're about to make a mistake. They walked together down the hallway, past sleeping patients and dim blue lights. Their voices were quiet, as if the walls themselves were listening. She told him her husband had been distant, that every dinner felt like sitting across from a ghost. He said he'd seen that happen before, when people survive but leave something of themselves behind. Do you ever feel like you saved the wrong person? She asked suddenly. He stopped walking. What do you mean? You brought him back. But he doesn't even look at me anymore. I sit beside him, and it's like I'm invisible. And sometimes I think maybe I wanted you to save me instead. The words hung there, raw and heavy. He took a step closer, his voice low. You don't mean that. But she did. And he could see it. They stood in silence for a long time, the world narrowing to the space between them. He finally said, I've tried to stay professional. I know. I thought I could handle this. So did I. She felt it before she saw it, the shift in the air, the pull between them that neither of them had the strength to resist anymore. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it brushed her arm, then her jaw. You should walk away, he whispered. Tell me to, she said. I can't. and then, finally, he kissed her. It wasn't planned or polite, it was slow and aching, like an apology and a confession tangled together. She felt every second of it, the warmth, the fear, the years of loneliness breaking open in one breath. When it ended, she stood there, dazed, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Don't be," she whispered back. "Not tonight." He stepped away first. His voice was hoarse when he said, "You should go home." She nodded, but her feet didn't move. Neither of them did. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, and for the first time since the accident, she felt alive. When she got into her car, her phone buzzed. A message. "It was the best night of my life. Thank you." Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed back. "Mine too." And in that quiet hospital parking lot, she finally realized, the woman who had walked in to check a file wasn't the same one who was driving away. Morning came with a clarity that hurt. The kind of cold, bright sunlight that exposes everything you'd rather leave in the dark. She woke early, the house too still, too quiet. Her husband was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, a mug of untouched coffee in front of him. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Didn't try." The tone was sharp, cold. The kind of tone that used to start arguments. But today she didn't have the strength to fight. She poured herself coffee, hands trembling just enough to make the cup rattle. He glanced at her, briefly, suspiciously, as if he could sense something had shifted. "You were out late last night," he said finally. She froze. "I went for a drive." "At midnight?" "It helps me think." He stared at her for a moment longer, then went back to his phone. "Must have been a long drive," he muttered. She didn't answer. She couldn't. All morning, her phone stayed silent. No messages. No calls. No trace of him. By noon, she broke and texted first. "Are you okay?" No response. She waited. An hour passed. 2. By sunset, she was pacing the hallway like a ghost in her own home. Every sound made her flinch, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, her husband's voice drifting from another room. Finally, she sent another message. "Please just tell me you're fine." Still nothing. The next day she drove to the hospital, her heart pounding in her throat. The receptionist smiled politely when she asked for him, but her words came like a quiet verdict. "He's not here anymore. He took a leave." A leave. No warning. No explanation. Just gone. She stepped outside into the harsh daylight, her legs weak, her pulse roaring in her ears. For the first time, she realized what this had truly been, not a love story, not even a betrayal. Just two broken people who'd collided in the dark and mistook the spark for salvation. That night, she lay awake next to her husband, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was slow, heavy. She reached for her phone one last time, half hoping there'd be something, anything. Nothing. Until the screen lit up. One new message. From an unknown number. "I'm sorry. I had to go before I made it worse. Don't come looking for me." Her vision blurred. She typed, deleted, typed again, but no words felt right. Finally, she wrote the only truth that mattered. "Too late. You already did." She hit send and turned off the phone, pressing it to her chest like it could still hold warmth. In the silence that followed, she realized, he hadn't just disappeared from the hospital. He'd left a space in her she could never fill again. 3 months passed. Enough time for wounds to heal. At least the ones people could see. Her husband had recovered. The limp was gone, the headaches had faded, and everyone said they were lucky. She smiled in all the right places, cooked dinner again, laughed when she had to. But every time she passed a hospital on the street, her chest tightened like memory was a heartbeat she couldn't silence. One morning, a letter arrived in the mail, routine checkup reminder, same hospital, same department. Her first instinct was to throw it away. Her second was to go. When she arrived, everything looked the same, the sterile lights, the soft echo of footsteps, the smell of disinfectant. But it didn't feel the same. The place was colder without him in it. The nurse checked her name on the list. Dr. Hayes will see you in a few minutes. She froze. The name hit her like static. He hadn't left after all. When he entered the room, time folded. His hair was shorter, his eyes tired, but that calm she remembered was still there, the same quiet gravity that had pulled her in the first place. He smiled, polite, professional. "It's good to see you." "Is it?" she whispered. He looked down, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Depends on which version of us you're asking." They talked like strangers who shared a secret neither dared to name. The words were safe, but the silence between them wasn't. When the checkup ended, she stood to leave. "I heard you took a leave," she said. "I did." "Because of me?" He hesitated. "Because of what I couldn't stop thinking about." She met his gaze, eyes soft. "You didn't answer my message." "I read it," he said quietly. 100 times. For a long moment, they just stood there, two people pretending to be fine in a room built for truth. Finally, he said, "You know this can't happen again." "I know. But I'm glad it did." She nodded, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "Me too." He walked her to the door. Just before she left, he said softly, "I still think about that night sometimes." She smiled faintly. "So do I. But not like a mistake. More like, proof I was still alive." He exhaled, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Take care of yourself." "You too." She stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her, quiet, final, almost kind. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain. She stopped on the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and looked back once, the hospital windows glowing like stars in the distance. Her phone buzzed. One new message. No regrets. Just memories. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because for the first time since that night, she wasn't searching for him in every quiet place. She was finally learning how to breathe without him.